All right, guys, we have a special show for you today. Today, I'm with Mark from SB Audience. Mark is the marketing and what exactly is your title, Mark?
International Sales and Marketing Manager for SB Acoustics and SB Audience.
So here's the deal. I've been around the audio world for a while now, and SB Audience is a name that a lot of people I don't think are very familiar with. And that's kind of why we wanted you on here to kind of tell us who SB Audience is and what they're all about. So, Mark, I'm going to give you a chance to tell us who is SB Audience. Are they a new company?
Well, Nick, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, great question. SB Audience is a new brand and a new player on the international market of pro speakers, pro transducers, loudspeaker drivers. But SB is by no means a new player at all. It's just the SB Audience brand. So if we track back a bit, SB Acoustics, that a lot of people know of, especially in the hi-fi world, tracks back some 15, 16 years. But the company, Sinabaja Electric in Indonesia, SB Sinabaja, hence the SB name,
That makes sense.
has been making drivers for more than 40 years. And actually, more than 70% of what we do is pro-related drivers.
Really?
So we've been making this stuff for 2.5 times longer than SB Acoustics. I'm 100% certain that you've heard our speaker drivers, our products across a large range of. They might be in your car, they might be in your pro speakers under a number of brands, including Italian and American brands.
So what is SB Audience about then?
Well, SB Audience is realizing that through more than 40 years of doing speaker drivers for other brands and a few of our own brands within the Indonesian market, most people outside of Indonesia don't really know a lot about Sinabaja Electric except SB Acoustics. So we have all of this knowledge and capability, but not many people know about it. So putting out our own pro brand to the Western world is our way of teaching people that, yes, we do this. The bread and butter for us is going to be having more of those big brands recognize us and go to us for those mass production orders. So we make somewhere between 7 and 8 million drivers a year.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a lot more than your high-end hi-fi SB acoustic speakers. That's less than 15% of what we do.
I sure didn't realize that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't mention names and brands, but
sorry, I already know some, but I won't mention them either.
$100,000 speakers, all the way down to products that go into car doors, which directly from the factory, and those are products that are made to a price, obviously.
So when you see your drivers in them, you're not finding them in typically like the SB Audience brand. You're not finding them in your low line stuff that you're going to be finding at your local like thrift store or something. You're finding them in higher end stuff, such as like what you said. I think you said movie theaters. You said hi-fi, like maybe high-end hi-fi speakers, things that's where you're going to find SB Audience. You're not going to find them low level. Is that right?
Okay. No, it's absolutely not the cheapest, and it never will be. With the line of SB Audience products we have put to the market, what we have tried to do is take some very affordable, and looking at the price, you're looking at sort of entry range, but we want to show people that if a driver is designed right, you can get very, very far with the low-cost design. A cheap driver doesn't have to sound cheap and nasty, let me put it that way. So if you put in the R&D and the knowledge of how to make the most of what you have, you can get very far. Putting out a product when it meets a certain spec is not what we do. The way that we do it is that we benchmark against multiple products on the market,
Mm-hmm.
and we keep going until we are absolutely certain our product beats them.
Nice.
Obviously, that's from our point of view, and there's some subjectivity to that, but this is our goal. We don't release anything until it beats the rest of the market.
So when you say beats the rest of the market, you mean beats the rest of the market in the same price range?
In a slightly higher price bracket. So we like to be a little bit under. We'll never be Chinese pricing, but we do need to be as a new player and a Southeast Asian manufactured brand. We do need to be attractive to everyone, and this is very much the philosophy of SV Acoustics, which has been very successful. And we're continuing that philosophy with SB Audience. Pro speaker drivers, it's a very, very competitive market. There are many players on the market that have been around for a long, long time. Many people aren't aware that a lot of them are actually manufactured now in China. And that's where we feel that, okay, they have the brand, they have the high price tag, and in a lot of cases we can beat that.
So when you say beat that, we're talking about sound quality. That's what you feel like you beat them at. So how do you quantify that? Is it listening tests? Is it actual like distortion tests, measurements? I mean, what do you mean by sounds better?
Well, in the world of pro audio, it has become more and more popular to quantify the behavior of a loudspeaker, or loudspeaker drive, or transducer, and this is predominantly done with the Klippel measurement system.
Sure.
We use this system, and it is absolutely by far the most comprehensive and useful tool to numerically quantify how a speaker driver behaves. However, sadly, we have found in many cases there is not necessarily a great correlation between a great Klippel report and good sound quality. Mm. You might have that it's able to reproduce at high volumes with little compression or great linearity, but it doesn't say anything about the subjective tonality or level of detail, weird things like sharpness to the sound.
Sure.
Nasal vocals. I mean, there's a lot of things you can't read out of a Klippel report. It is useful. We do use it. There are other things, distortion, the frequency response, waterfall plots, intermodular distortion, and those are all tools. At the end of the day, we think that the greatest tool is our ears.
You know, and it's interesting because when a lot of people think of SB Acoustics, I should say, not SB Audience, because SB Audience is still relatively new. You guys have been around for what, about 3 years, right?
Yeah, SB Audience 3 years, probably that by now. Yeah.
So around 3 years. So SB Acoustics, a lot of people are more familiar with because they've been around for 15 plus years. One of the things that you'll find when you hear people say is that they're very high end and they sound great.
Yeah, our philosophy, both with SB Acoustics and SB Audience, is standing in front of a compromise. We will always choose the one that sounds the best.
Now, I will say this. I have had the pleasure to use some of your drivers, a couple of your 44 CDN PKs, which are really good. And then I have the non-Neo version. They're both the 1-inch compression drivers, and then also the 12-inch Neo, which is the 400D. And I got to say, out of all of them, they were just so, I mean, they sounded so clean and clear. And that's the one thing that I was really impressed with, because I've heard a lot of PA drivers and I've used a lot of PA drivers, and they just don't seem to have the same clarity. And I think you said it before, the value proposition of what you guys are trying to offer is very high. And I would agree with that, because that 12-inch driver, I don't know that I know of one that is better at that price point. Well, none that I've used, I should say.
Mhm.
Very, very great driver.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for those kind words, and this is testimony to what it is that we try to achieve, and that is, you know, making bringing that powerful sound without compromising the sound quality. And it is hard to do. It is hard to do. With pro products, there is a push for SPL. SPL is enormously important, and it has to be. It has to be, because that is what those products are aimed to do. Put a lot of sound out to cover a huge area, and to do that, efficiency is key, because if you have a higher efficiency, you need to push less power. If you're pushing less power, you have less distortion and you have less compression. So SPL is key. However, there is a balance. If you let it be the end all and be all, in our experience, the sound quality will suffer. So you can't use every trick in the book to make it sound great and sacrifice SPL. There is a balance, and this is what we try to achieve. And this Nero 12-inch midwoofer is a great example of that, with a copper sleeve, which does sacrifice some SPL, but it is very low distortion. There are other things like a very low self-induction in the voice coil, and that allows for a lot less modulation. There are other things. It doesn't have a particularly low resonance frequency, and there is some breakup there. It's fairly easy to manage, but there is some breakup. And it's absolutely on purpose that we don't damp everything out of it to get the smoothest, most easy to work with frequency response, because your dynamics and your detail and your clarity are just going to suffer. So this is that trade-off. It's actually fairly easy to make speaker drivers that are flat, but you lose the dynamics and the detail.
That's interesting. I have never heard anyone else mention that before. So what do you mean by that? You feel like you lose detail in the music, and you also lose the dynamics of when a note hits?
So everywhere in a speaker, you have components that are meant to be either soft or rigid. So you have the suspension components,
Sure,
which are they keep everything centered, and in a pro style speaker, they need to be quite rigid to not have everything fall apart when you have huge amounts of power going into it. It's a suspension system and a damper. The more damping you put into it, the more it's going to help you prevent those peaks and dips. You can have spiders and surround with a lot of damping built in, so that you prevent these out of phase cancellations that create peaks and dips, and that will give you a very much smoother, nice looking frequency response, and your waterfall plot will also look very tidy. But a frequency response is very much sort of a single input steady state type of a environment. That's not music. Music is all sorts of frequency going on top of each other and starting and stopping instantly. And so subjectively listening to music will bring out those differences more than looking at a frequency response graph or a few measurements.
So, Mark, one of the things that surprised me and interested me was Troy. He does his own channel on YouTube, and he was testing out one of your drivers. It was one of your 2-inch drivers, and I can't remember which one it was. One of your 65, and it was the one with some copper shortening rings on the compression driver. And one of the things that he brought up was the distortion. The distortion on that driver, as you turned up the volume of that driver, the distortion actually didn't go as much up as the volume. It stayed lower, and it was very interesting. And for him, it was one of the ones that he had tested, one of the best ones that he had tested, I believe. You can go back and check his words. I'll link that down below. But I felt even with the ones that you sent me, the 1-inch drivers, which by the way did not have those copper shortening rings, still did very good at distortion. When we talk about distortion, I want to be clear to the viewers that when we talk about distortion, a driver might have a really good distortion at like a really low level, but as we turn that volume up, that distortion could go up quite a bit. And it seems like you guys have done a pretty good job of keeping that in handle, at least from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I mean, if you look at our entry-level Bianco drivers, that's not what we were talking about now. But
No.
if I may touch on that, we feel that, again, even looking at specs and comparing numerical figures, we find that we do very well on price performance. Mm-hmm. But on subjective listening, and this is where those things come in, balancing those things, that frequency response is one thing, but we need everything else to come together nicely. We find that our entry-level products really come in at a way better performance point on sound quality compared to everything else we have found on the market. With even the Rossell 44 millimeter compression drivers, we've pushed things a little bit further. So we haven't introduced full copper cap, and this is because we wanted to maintain a higher sensitivity. But we felt that by tweaking everything else, we have achieved enough that it is a much better product, and it does fare very well compared to the Bianco predecessor. The price point is also different. So this is that balance. On the 65 millimeter Rosso that you brushed on before, that has got a copper sleeve motor. I believe the one that was in that review was the neodymium motor version. There's a lot that goes into it. Now, very saturated steel just sounds better and behaves better than non-saturated. So there are other things. The quality, the type of, the neodymium magnet comes in many qualities. Steel come in many qualities. And then obviously there's the geometry of everything. And it all comes in and plays a role. And we have tweaked and modified and perfected enough to, I think, make some really standout products that aren't going to break the bank. I mean, they are at a competitive price point compared to many of the others, but the sound quality is at a different level.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so far, I've only used 3 of your drivers, so I can't say up and down the product line. I don't want to lead anyone astray, but this is the thing that I found interesting is I found so many people that with the video that I just put out with the Audience 212 that said something to the extent of, I've never heard of that brand. Why'd you go with like off-brand speakers? So I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Like, no offense, but I can also understand that because you had mentioned earlier, the market's oversaturated. There's a lot of drivers out there, a lot that people haven't heard of. And so their concern is, okay, well, these people, this is a new name. I've never heard of it. Therefore, it can't be any good. And that's the exact opposite of the truth. And that's why I love bringing brands like you to people's eyes, because there are good valued products out there. Problem is, there are a lot of really bad products out there too, and we want to be able to separate them from what people are buying. So if they're going to go buy a product, I can say to them, hey, look, go get an SB audience. From my experience, they've been good. There's going to be some brands where I'm not going to tell them to go buy, because I've had really bad experiences with them, and that's fine. But that's also why I can't say buy every SB audience product, because I've never tried all of them.
Yeah,
we all
sure.
know everyone can have a dud, but
Yeah.
I have been very impressed with the quality of the build. One of the things that I've really loved is that you guys don't go cheap on the build quality. Your compression drivers, all the ones that I used at least, had spring-loaded terminals on them. Same with the woofers. They weren't your normal, quick disconnects. And for me, I like spring-loaded for a lot of reasons. It's easier to just put in and out, especially if I'm testing. It's so much better when I'm testing than having to worry about having to put ends on everything else. But the other thing is too, it just, for me, screams better quality. You put in the however many more cents it is for us to have a much nicer connection. What I feel is a much more secure connection.
Yeah. Well, this is a trade-off. Are you appealing to the high quantity market, where it's all about ease of assembly and no room for error, sort of like your spade terminals is the go-to product, because the cable loom is finished, it's done. There's nothing that can go wrong. It's either put on there correctly, or it's not on there at all. And the spring-loaded terminals, they appeal to different markets. Sort of, that's very, very good for rental PA and DIY, and some smaller touring setups, because you'll be able to service your products in the field, replace products very easily with no tools. I love the spring terminals myself personally. They look good, and you can get nasty spring terminals. We use spring terminals that'll last.
All right, Mark, I have to ask you a question though, because there's one thing that was bugging me, and you probably have an answer to this. Okay, first thing, what I liked, the 12-inch woofer came with gasket tape, so thank you, because most PA drivers don't have any gasket tape at all. They don't come with anything. So that was actually huge. I love that. However, the compression driver came with no screws at all. So what's the deal?
That's a decision we made.
Okay.
That actually on some markets it's very much a must-have, and on some markets it's not that important. What we feel is that very often you get a set of screws with a certain driver, and it's not necessarily particularly useful for your setup.
Gotcha.
Right. If in this case you used an SB audience horn and an SB audience driver, that way, yeah, sure, we could have supplied bolts that would fit that exact application. But very often, you would have used maybe a screw-on adapter, or God knows, it can be many things. Mounted onto wood, mounted onto the back of some other horn. If we include screws, half of the time they're going to be the wrong screws.
Gotcha. So just not include them at all. I was like, no screws. I was like, all right, yes, I'm like, what the? Wait a second, where are the screws at? What did I do? And then I opened another box. I'm like, wait, okay. Oh, the third box. I'm like, they just don't include screws. But no, seriously, a huge shout out to including gasket material, because you need that, and a lot of them don't come with it. In fact, a lot of the ones that I have reviewed don't come with it. The Celestion didn't come with any. The Fatal Pro didn't come with any. Some Dayton woofers I had didn't come with any, I don't believe. So, I mean, there's been a lot of in fact, I can't think of, now that I'm thinking about it, I can't think of any professional drivers that came with gasket tape besides the SB audience. So that was actually something that I was very thankful for, because that's something that you need. And a lot of DIYers, if this is just like one or two build, they don't have it.
if you're replacing a woofer in an old PA cabinet that's seen a lot of in and out of trucks, then it's highly likely that putting a new driver in there, it's not going to seal up optimally. So traditionally, drivers are whacked in without seals because it's quicker, and if everything lines up perfectly, it's not really necessary.
Sure.
And another aspect is on a PA woofer, that on the front of it, there always is a front gasket. But in reality, most people have them mounted from the front, so where you need the gasket is on the rear. Yeah, so we throw in a bit of gasket, and you'll have a perfect seal and get rid of those nasty buzzing noises when you crank up the volume.
All right. Thanks again, Mark, for spending some time with us, telling us a little bit about SB Audience. We really do appreciate it. Do you want anything else you want to say before we go?
Well, I guess the proof is in the pudding. So try it out, give it a listen, make up your own mind. And Nick, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Mark. All right, guys, this is Toyd's DIY Audio and SB Audience. We're out.